All right, I think we'll get started. Just so everyone knows, this virtual meeting is being recorded. Michael, do you want to kick us off? And let me confirm, everybody can see the slides I'm sharing, right?
Yeah, I got it here, John.
Good. Okay. Yep. I'll turn it over to you to kick the meeting off, Michael.
Okay, sounds good. I'm going to go ahead and call us to order. Our only objective for this morning is to look at the draft implementation plan that John distributed here recently. And so we'll spend a couple hours looking at that and trying to hammer out any last details on it. So we did get an agenda out to everybody here recently. Looking for a motion to approve the agenda this morning.
So moved.
Looking for a second as well.
A second.
Any opposed? Okay, awesome. We were also looking for approval of some recent meeting minutes and summaries. I don't know if anyone's had a chance to look at those or if there were any comments, but looking for a motion for approval of the August 12th and September 9th meeting minutes and summaries, if everyone's comfortable with them.
Yeah, and Michael, I have not yet submitted or distributed the September minutes. I'm behind on my minutes, but
okay,
we still needed to approve the August 12th minutes. We decided not to approve them since I'd only circulated them a day or two before the previous meeting. So hopefully folks had a chance, if they want to review the August 12th, and we can at least approve those today.
Sorry, John, I probably had the wrong agenda pulled up.
That's okay. I tweaked the agenda a little bit and took off the September minutes for this slide.
Okay. All right, sounds good. So motion to approve the August 12th minutes and summary.
Hey, Michael and John, one quick question. Did you get my comments, John, on the minutes back on 8/8?
Yes, I did, and those have been incorporated.
Okay. Do we want to share that?
I'm trying to remember what they were.
I'm trying to find it myself.
Okay. I'm hesitant to try to pull it up because I got my screens all set up for sharing 4 different things, and if I start moving things around, I may mess something up.
Why don't we just hold off until our meeting? It's 2 weeks out then, and we'll wait. We can lump those in with the next set of meeting minutes if that's okay with you, John.
Yeah, that works for me.
Okay. Yeah. Sounds good. I think that's all I've got. I'll turn it back over to John.
Sure. Trying to think if there's any newsworthy items. There was another Water SC meeting last week. Joe Kuhn, do you want to give an update on that meeting?
Sure. Good discussion continued at Water SC. There was some discussion of well, there was a lot of discussion on the drought. Hope Mazzell presented, and there was some discussion about drought recommendations from Water SC on the current structure of drought policy and the drought response committee and things of that nature. There was also a legal review of ag registrations and what DES can and cannot do, kind of a thing in regards to that. And upcoming on next week, there's going to be some discussion on water reuse. And I think that more or less captures the ongoing discussion.
Yeah. Any other RBC members have any newsworthy items they want to bring to our attention? Okay, if not, we will move on. Any public and agency comment? So any members of the public that are attending or agency folks, if you'd like to make a comment or ask a question, now's the time. All right, hearing nothing, let's move on. I'm kind of adding one quick agenda item based on some RBC comments, or an RBC comment that I got this morning from Alan. If you recall, I circulated Chapter 9 and Chapter 1 last week. Hope you've had a chance to review those. It's especially important to review Chapter 9 because it consolidates all of the planning process, technical and program, and policy and legislative regulatory recommendations that we've been working on over the last several meetings. As you review that, you'll see that the recommendations are typically bolded, and then there's a discussion after that. While we've settled pretty much on the bolded recommendation, except in an instance that I'm going to talk about here, I really want your input on the narrative that's behind it, which tries to succinctly capture some of the discussion around that recommendation and why the RBC is making that recommendation. So looking for your review and comment on those. Alan has reviewed it and sent me 2 comments that I wanted to bring to y'all's attention this morning to see if we can get consensus on. The first one has to do with the recommendation around recycled water. And the recommendation itself is highlighted in yellow. It was DES should perform studies and analysis in support of a recycled water statute in South Carolina. Alan's proposing to change the wording of that recommendation to what you see in red. The state water plan should include reuse, parentheses, recycled water as a source of water for South Carolina, and DES should implement regulations for its use that support water resilience in South Carolina. Is the RBC okay with that change? You comfortable with kind of the rewording of that recommendation? Any questions about that? I don't know if Alan's able to join us yet. I know Tony is on. Tony, I'm not sure if Alan ran that recommendation by you. But
yeah, him and Glenn both, we all 3 talked about it, and that's kind of what we came up with. I thought him and Glenn were going to jump on. He might be running a little late. Okay.
Other RBC members, are you comfortable with that change to the recommendation? The narrative would stay the same. It's just the wording of the recommendation's a little different. John's giving a thumbs up. Anyone good with you, Michael? Anyone opposed to it? Okay, well, hearing nothing, we will make that change. So we'll use what's in red and I'll delete what's in yellow. Alan had one other suggestion, and it is in one of the regulatory policy and legislative category of recommendations, and it had to do with review periods for groundwater and surface water. So the suggested change here is not to the recommendation, which is in bold, but it's just a subtle adjustment to the narrative behind it. And the narrative behind it did say that review periods of 10 to 20 years were discussed. Some RBC members favored shorter periods and more frequent reviews to be protective of water resources, while others preferred longer review periods to better align with the necessary capital investment infrastructure. And Alan's proposed revision simplifies a little bit and just said review periods of 10 to 20 years were discussed, with some RBC members favoring 10-year periods, while others recommended a 20-year period to support the necessary capital investment needed for infrastructure.
So one thing, this is Jason, one thing I would point out in both languages, which I also pointed out in the meeting when we were in person, is the way that both of these are worded makes it sound as if only 10 and or 20-year periods were discussed, when in reality, we discussed a whole wide range of other numbers. And so I'm fine with saying, you know, among the numbers, 10 and 20 years were discussed, but to imply that none of the council members had any recommendations outside of that range does not accurately reflect the conversation.
Okay, what do you think would be a more accurate representation of the conversation, Jason?
I mean, I think the first set of recommended language that we already agreed on is more accurate than the second, but both imply similar things. And unless we want to reopen the can of worms, which I thought we'd agreed everybody was over it at that point that I think it's probably not a good idea to try to wordsmith it further unless we want to spend more time on it.
Yeah. I don't remember the full discussion, but would it be more appropriate to take out the 10 to 20 years and just say different lengths of review periods were discussed, with some RBC members favoring shorter period? Well, I wouldn't want to say shorter periods because that might suggest shorter than what the current 5 years is for groundwater. So that wouldn't be appropriate. Regardless, we could still take out the 10 to 20 years and just say that there was discussion around various lengths. Some recommended 20-year review periods to support necessary capital investment and infrastructure, but leave it a little more general. Any thoughts?
I mean, one thing that would be a very minor tweak that would maintain the agreed upon language, but also get to this point is the council settled in on review periods of 10 to 20 years. But even that, honestly, I don't think we would get unanimous approval of. So I don't have a recommended modification to the language, and that's why I didn't reply with comments on Chapter 9 in regard to this provision, because I felt like I'd already been given plenty of opportunity at the council meetings to talk about how I felt like longer review periods made sense with bond issuance and capital improvement cycles, which often go multiple decades, not less.
Okay.
John, I think the proposed, what it sounded like you were proposing was something more vague that didn't include the years. And I think that's accurate, just to say that we had a wide discussion and with varying opinions for the reasons that are already stated, to both protect water resources and then to be able to, have the capital investment included as well.
Yeah, but Alicia, the challenge with taking out the number though, and leaving the bold comment, review periods for groundwater and surface water renewal should be reevaluated to facilitate long-term planning efforts. And when you say that, when we say that shorter review periods were considered, to John's point, it makes it sound like there was enough of the members that thought less than 10 years made sense. And the reality was, I think the number of folks that would say 10 or less years is a very small portion of the overall council. But when we don't get into the numbers and when we don't vote on numbers, you have a lack of clarity on where everybody stands. And it's my general problem with this whole statement is the overall council's unwillingness to come in on a specific stance on a specific issue. And that's a problem.
Yeah, Jason, and you mentioned it before, though. I don't think we're going to reach consensus on a recommended review period.
How about review periods of 10 to 20 years were discussed. Why RBC members favor 10 years while others prefer longer periods. You ain't got to put the 20 years, go 10, and then longer periods. Kind of, it's a little more broad, but also kind of keeps it out there at 10, which I think most people favored.
I mean, the good thing about the current yellow language is it implies longer review periods than 20, and in some cases, shorter review periods than 10. To me, not to beat a dead horse, but there's problems with taking the language all out together, and there's problems with revising it. And again, this is the third or fourth time that we've talked about this.
Yeah.
What
So
about John, if Alan's concern is with the phrasing protective of water resources, could we just say with some RBC members favoring shorter periods and more frequent reviews to closely monitor water resources or something along those lines? Maybe it's the protective language that's the issue.
I mean, the good thing about the current language is it does kind of give a little bit of a reason why some want less time. because they want to protect the water resources. And I don't think that's something we need to that's not language we need to shy away from. And then the reality is some want 20 or more years because of capital investment in bonds. And that's not language we should shy away from. I don't know what we're accomplishing by softening the language beyond that which was intended by those making the shorter recommendations and the longer recommendations.
Tony, I'm just conjecturing here, but I'm assuming y'all thought that including to be protective of water resources suggested that if it wasn't 10 years and it was 20 years, that's ignoring protection of water resources and not protective. Is that some of the discussion maybe you had with Gwen and Tony and Alan, or?
So I did not have that discussion. I kind of like the protective water resources in there. I'm not exactly sure why he took that out personally.
Yeah. Okay.
So I don't want to speak on his part on that. I think it's fine to leave in there. I mean, I think he was just concerned. You know, he's really shooting for that 20 years. He just wants to get a little bit longer review periods is what he really wants.
Yeah.
Maybe
what we should do, since Alan's not on the phone and he can't defend his recommended suggestion, we should table this, and if he is able to join, circle back to it.
Yeah, possibly we could. Possibly we could say to be more protective of water resources. Just as.
Right. I mean, you're right. You can't argue that 10 years is allowing for better protection, better monitoring than 20 years. So that's more of an accurate statement.
Yeah, I think this might, again, he's not here to weigh in, but this might accomplish a good compromise between not changing at all and making a minor change to change it from the less definitive assumption. So, I mean, I would be okay with this minor adjustment if everybody else is.
Okay. Todd, you have a comment or a question? Todd, did you have something you wanted to say? You can unmute yourself. Okay. Well, we'll come back to this if Alan is able to join. And if he's not able to join, maybe I'll run this by him. Todd said no comment. Maybe I'll run this by him to see if he's okay with just adding more rather than his suggested language to remove protective of water resources. Okay. What we want to work on today is this implementation plan. I did circulate a draft table of the implementation plan. Since I circulated it, I did go in and make just a few minor tweaks, and we'll review those just a minute when I pull that up. Hopefully y'all had a chance to review that. Just as a reminder, Chapter 10 is the implementation chapter, and within it will be the table that we circulated, what we end up with for that table that we circulated. And the intent of that table is to organize strategies and actions into overarching objectives. The strategies generally align with both our recommendations and our water management strategies that were identified in chapters 7 and 9, and also drought recommendations in 8. Along with the actions and strategies, we try to include a little bit of information about schedule, and that's typically, what year would this be done following completion of the plan? Sometimes it's like the first or second year, sometimes it's a range. And then where possible, we try to include a little bit of information about budget. Is this an action that's already covered by existing DES budget or some other entity's budget, or additional things needed? So to the extent possible, we've added some information in that table to cover that. What we want to focus on today is primarily coming to agreement on the actions that align with the strategies, and potentially doing some prioritization of actions and strategies. So we've got our overarching objectives. We've got a subset of strategies that align with those that we've identified in our plan and the recommendations. And then each strategy has one or multiple actions to help implement that strategy. So based on your recommendations and the water management strategies that you identified, they generally align within these 5 objectives. These 5 objectives are generally consistent with most of the other RBCs. Their actions and strategies were very similar in many instances. Sometimes we had a few more objectives, but yours generally align with these, so that's how we've organized them. The planning framework recommends that the RBCs attempt to prioritize not only the actions and strategies, but also the objectives. In other RBCs, we found this to be a little bit of a difficult exercise because within each objective, there's multiple actions, and sometimes those are high priority actions, sometimes they're low priority actions. So there wasn't always consensus on, well, how do we prioritize the objectives when there's different priorities for the different actions and strategies? Because of that, sometimes the RBCs have decided not to do a prioritization of these objectives. Sometimes they decided to just say high priority, medium priority, low priority. And sometimes they've given it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 priority, with 1 being the highest and 5 being the lowest. I'm not going to ask you to prioritize the objectives now. I think it's easier to do once we go through all the actions, and then we circle back at the end of the meeting and see if we want to prioritize these, or if we want to not prioritize them, or simply prioritize them by just saying high, medium, and low. Everybody comfortable with that? I'm going to take silence as a yes. Thank you, Todd, for the thumbs up. Okay, so let's dive into it. So I'm going to share the Word version of the implementation plan. I think what I circulated came from an Excel version. The Word version, same thing, same information, just looks a little different. And we're going to start at the top with the first objective and work our way down. And again, what we want to focus on is generally the strategy. We want to talk about whether we want to prioritize the strategy after we get through each action or strategy within an objective. And we're going to review mainly these actions. These are the suggested actions to get the discussion moving. They're very similar to what other RBCs have agreed to. With that said, I don't want to put words in your mouth. I want y'all to come up with actions that you're willing to support and you think are relevant to support the strategy. So the first objective covers the water management strategies that y'all have identified that would be useful in the basin. And they're organized by first the municipal strategies. I'm moving to the next page now, and you'll see that we've got the agricultural strategies here. And then we've got the list of industrial and energy conservation strategies. Let me back up to the top. So if we look at the actions, there's been a little bit of variation in what the RBCs decided to do with actions. What we've put here is what some of the more recent RBCs, including Lower Savannah, Salkehatchie, and I think maybe the Upper Savannah, wanted to do. The first one was just help identify funding opportunities and technical assistance. As part of Chapter 10, there will be several tables, and they're referred to down here that you haven't seen yet, that identify funding sources for municipal water utilities. They're likely not, it's not any new information. They're very familiar with funding opportunities, but it is a comprehensive list of opportunities. So that's the first action. The second one, some of the RBCs felt it was important to encourage utilities to do water loss leak detection audits. Many of them already do this. They don't always necessarily do it, from what I understand, using the AWWA M36 method, which I think has been updated over the years. But they felt it was important to encourage that. So that's one of the first talking points I want to see. Do you want to include that as an action? I guess I'm asking some of the water utility affiliated folks here, Alicia, Jason, Tony.
If we should prioritize the strategies?
No, if you want to actually include this as an action, which was encouraging the utilities to conduct these water loss leak detection.
I think encourage folks to do this is a good idea, but it is an encouragement, and nor is our RBC plans legally binding. But the American Water Works Association makes this recommendation, and so I think it's pretty safe for any water utility to support it, with the realization that some can do it and some won't. But in an ideal world, we would find the grant funding for everybody to do this. And regardless of where their water loss numbers are, it would be a good thing for the resource, but it'd also be a good thing for those utilities, because they probably want to charge for every drop that they produce. So Charleston Water's in favor of this. I don't know about the other two.
Yeah, I'm in favor of it.
Yeah, we are too.
Okay. Okay, we'll leave that as an action. Another action, which I think the Upper Savannah RBC identified and might have also been included with the Lower Savannah, was that RBC should work with utilities to determine how water is being used in the basin, municipally supplied water, and better understand where conservation measures may have the most impact. For example, there was discussion in the Lower Savannah, Salkehatchie, about all the irrigation that occurs in Hilton Head and along the coast. And that's a lot different than a lot of the municipal water use in the more rural parts of the Salkehatchie Basin. But they felt that, knowing how water is being used allow them to focus the message and where some of these conservation strategies may be most impactful. But not all RBCs suggested that as an action. So is that something you would like to include? And, you're a small RBC, remember? And, as we're including these actions, be thinking about the fact that a lot of this, especially where it says the RBC works with, or the RBC does, are things that you're going to be asked to do and be expected to do. So if you don't think it's something that's reasonably likely that you would do, I'd suggest you don't include it as an action. But keep that in mind, as you continue to work. Once this plan is out, this is what you'll be working on. So do you want this as an action?
Jonathan, you kind of beat me to the point. And I brought this up in the Edisto RBC too. Some things sound really like a great idea on paper, but we've got to ask ourselves not just whether we would be willing to do some of these things or could do these things, but who else after us may be doing these things. Maybe a potentially completely different makeup of RBC members from a completely different makeup of sectors. And I don't believe it's that feasible for a handful of proactive RBC members on some future RBC council to show up at any utility to tell them how they should be running their municipality. I don't think it would be well received from the smallest of the utilities to the largest. And then I just don't think anybody on the council realistically has the time to do that. So for those reasons, I don't think this is a great idea to include.
Yeah. You'd recommend removing 3 then? Go ahead. Somebody was going to say.
I just wanted to chime in really fast. Hickson Cop, Williamsburg County. I think the other thing that, just to follow up on Jason's point too, is like he mentioned earlier, this isn't really we have to understand what's enforceable and what's not. And a lot of this is kind of relying or piggybacking off of, well, wouldn't it be great if you all share? And I think there's a lot of privacy concerns, and some of those big users may feel somewhat exposed and or targeted for using the resource, despite the fact of kind of general public benefit that it brings. And so this may actually make what are otherwise good community partners catch a little bit of fire and or be a target of perhaps undue conservation efforts, and or from industries who are actually using the resource well and or managing it well, but just use a lot of it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other RBC members have comment about this one? Otherwise, I think I'll scratch it unless someone strongly feels we should keep it. Nope. Okay. I'm gonna scratch it. Let me pause actually, because I just noticed Robert Boyles has joined us. Riley Egger, I believe, who represents the Coastal Conservation League, is going to be departing the RBC, and I'm not exactly sure when, but the CCL has submitted an application to replace her, and Robert was submitted as the applicant. Robert, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Robert Boyles here, representing the Coast Conservation League. Appreciate y'all offering me the opportunity to say something. Just really glad to be here. I'm glad to be in the game. Water is extraordinarily important to me personally, to us professionally, and I'm glad to be back helping to promote stewardship, good, strong, long-term stewardship. Water for you, water for me, water for today, water for tomorrow. So appreciate that, and appreciate the opportunity to say hello. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Robert. And you're joining at a little bit of an awkward time because we're just finishing up the plan, but given your history and background, I think you're very familiar with this planning process and what's going on. So in that regard, I think you probably get up to speed pretty quick.
Well, thank you. And I just want to say thank you all for y'all's commitment to this process. And it's a lot of work and unheralded work, but extraordinarily important. So glad to be a small part of it in this role. Thank you.
Yep, great. And I also noticed Alan just joined. So Alan, since you joined, we were just talking about one of the recommendations that you had proposed, and I want to circle back while it's fresh in everyone's mind.
Yeah, thank you, John. I apologize. Yeah, I thought it started at 10:30, so my apologies to the group. And Robert, I heard the news about the Coastal Conservation League, and great to be working with you again. So appreciate you joining us this morning as well. All right, John. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so we had some discussion around your proposed tweaking of the narrative behind the permit renewal period recommendation. What you had proposed is shown here in red. What was originally there was in yellow. There was concern with, there was some concern that Jason raised, which I think was also mentioned during previous RBC deliberations about, we did talk about other review periods besides just 10 to 20. So Jason,
John, I think the real clarification, and I'm good with Jason's edits on the upper end. I think my concern about the original language was that it says RBC members favoring shorter periods, and it didn't define that. And my concern would be that by not defining that, somebody might think that means 3 years or 6 years, or I just felt like that was the reason I reworded it, was the favoring shorter periods. So if we could clarify that and then also meet Jason's needs, I'm good with it. I tried to work the 10 and 20 in so that it was specific and clarified the shorter periods. That was my motivation.
It was your concern that people might read this as shorter periods, meaning less than 5 years?
I think it could be. I guess you clarified that somewhere, I thought, as well. But I felt like favoring shorter periods was just too vague for me. I would prefer it say 10 years there, or my proposed language with, if Jason would prefer to have 20 to 30 years inserted for the longer period of time, certainly that's reasonable. I just felt like we needed to clarify it so that if a lawmaker's looking at it, they understand what we discussed.
Mm-hmm. Jason, was your point earlier that there was a member too that was in favor of shorter than 10-year periods?
Since we didn't take a vote on specific numbers, I'm reading between the lines, but I believe there's at least one member that would favor maintaining the 5-year review periods. But if we can agree all on this call that it's 10 or more, with some favoring more than 20 years, then we could change the language to that. But it only takes one council member wanting a review period less than 10 for the original language to be accurate.
Jason, I thought the only one I thought that wanted the shorter review periods, I thought that was Riley. I could be mistaken, but I felt like she was comfortable with the 10, but was not comfortable with 15 and 20. So if your recollection is that it was also her that favored the shorter period, I'm pretty certain she was good with 10, but just not 15 or 20.
So, and I'll let Robert chime in if he wants to, but because I'm sure Riley's been keeping him in the loop. But and welcome to the group, Robert. But she was really against having any numbers in this provision because it was a movement from the current status quo within the law, which was 5. Was my understanding from the several discussions we've already had on it. But again, if the CCL is okay and there's no other objecting members to us saying 10 to 20 or more time, then I'm fine with that. But that would be a decision and comment for either the CCL or somebody else on our committee that believes, or council that believes, that a number less than 10 was discussed and should be considered. I'm for 20 plus. So it's a question to me which I can't answer. It's for those council members that may or may not feel strongly about that.
So, Robert, we're really throwing you into the fire here. Do you have any thoughts, or are you comfortable trying to represent the CCL's opinion?
I think so. I probably do need to, want to respect Riley's position on this. We did talk about this a little bit, kind of getting me up to speed, and I certainly understand, the need to ensure, longevity for capital investment. I get that. But I want to make sure, if you all would afford me just a little bit of time to get up to speed and circle back with Riley on this, if you don't mind.
Okay.
John John Boyer, it sounds like John Crago's given Robert an out by being one objecting voice to excluding 10 or less. The reality is the current law says 5. And if there's no change in the law, 5 stands. But me and Alan and a whole bunch of other people agree that that is too often, and especially should not be extended to surface water review periods. And so, Alan, if I could just propose that we leave the language as the yellow highlighted, review periods of 10 to 20 years were discussed, with some RBC members favoring short periods. Thanks, John Grego, for speaking up. And then and more frequent reviews to be protective of water resources, while others preferred longer review periods, for example, Charleston Water, which better align with necessary capital investments. The only language smithing would be potentially the addition of the word more in front of protective of water resources, so that it's a less definitive statement. In other words, if we go to 10 years or more, it isn't necessarily not protective of the water resources.
What do you think, Alan? Is that an acceptable sort of compromise? We're not really doing much other than added more, but given John Grego's comment, I'm not sure that we could remove the 10-year part, or what do you think? You still there, Alan?
I'm sorry, I was talking over my mute. Yeah, John, I think I certainly would want to move this forward with the group, so I'm not going to slow it down. I think the current language could use some refinement, but if we have 2 votes that would prefer to keep the language that says shorter terms, I'm okay with that.
Okay. Okay, let's leave it with this one tweak. We'll add the word more here. As you all continue to review Chapter 9, and I think I've asked for comments to be submitted by the end of this week. If someone has a different suggestion on the narrative that you think we could quickly come to consensus on, I'm open to hear it. But we have spent a good amount of time talking about this one, so I'm thinking we cut our losses and keep it where it is. Okay, let's go back to implementation plan. We've scratched item 3 here. Action 4 was to implement education and outreach about recommended water practices and funding opportunities. I think in reality, what this may look like is you'll get a lot of support from DES. I think they're intending to help significantly with education and outreach, at least in the coming year, and support RBCs in that matter. So that's not necessarily something that would just fall on you. I think you'd have support on that. 5 just recognizes that, hopefully individual water users implement some of these practices. And ideally, as you go to do a 5-year plan update or at whatever frequency you're updating the plan, you want to look back and say, has there been progress in reducing per capita water use, or reducing, if we're talking about agricultural water use, the amount of water that's applied or the amount of water that's lost. So a future update would assumedly try to capture any change in per capita demands and overall water use. And that's what this final actions here is trying to address. So is everyone comfortable generally with these 5 actions then that we've left here? Okay, I'm going to take silence as consent. For the agricultural strategies, similar set of actions. Help ag users identify funding opportunities. We do have a table in Chapter 10 that talks about a lot of USDA funding opportunities. Second one would be to do education and outreach about practices and funding opportunities. The third one is just the users implement these practices. And the fourth one is just try to get some information to see if there's been progress in implementation of some of these. We've struggled with agricultural RBC input on this council. But what I've heard from some of the other councils, especially recently, is that there has been a lot of push to do many of these strategies. Farmers are already doing a lot of this stuff, especially, starting with soil management and cover cropping. So we've put this note as indication of that's one of the priorities. Without that, then some of these other strategies don't even make sense. Anyone have any other thoughts or comments on this? And I know Sam Quinney, you are here. You've, I think, been generally comfortable with how this has been organized in other basins. You okay with how this looks here? I thought I saw Sam was on, but maybe he had to leave. Oh, no, you're still there. And Sam, you're on mute if you are trying to say something, but if not, that's okay. Okay. Everyone's okay with this? We'll move on. Everybody good? All right, again, I'm going to take silence as consent. A similar objective, or the last part C of this objective, to efficiently use water and conserve water resources, just for industrial and energy conservation. And we've got a very similar, if not identical, set of strategies here for industrial energy conservation. Okay, I'm going to keep moving on unless someone speaks up and recommends a change. All right, now we're getting into this second objective. You'll notice that we haven't prioritized these here. There's no note. So as we go through these, once we get through all of them, we're going to come back and we're going to see if we want to prioritize any of them. The first one that falls under this objective was the South Carolina legislature should authorize recurring funding as requested by DES for annual ongoing water planning activities, including river basin planning. The action here is DES action, is to identify the funding needs and communicate with the legislature. Everyone comfortable with that? Okay. The next one is legislature to establish a grant program. This was a recommendation that you came up with, as did other RBCs, that specifically helps support implementation of river basin plans and the action strategies within them. Again, this one falls on DES to identify funding needs and outline program requirements and work with the legislature to potentially develop this type of funding program, this type of grant. Everyone good with that? Thumbs up, good, thank you. All right, the third one, state should support statewide water education programs to existing agencies such as the cooperative extensions that include all sectors of water use and promote the types of water management strategies recommended in the river basin plans. Again, I think this is something that the state is intending to do and has been discussed as part of the one of the recommendations in the state water plan, which is currently being prepared. So the actions that we've got around that one are DES and the RBCs determine the topics. What are you trying to, what's the message that you're trying to get out there? Meet with some of these entities that already do this work and work with them to effectively engage with different stakeholders in the public around the message that we're trying to get across in these plans. That's kind of wrapped up actually in action 3 as well. And then the RBCs with support from DES and contractors as needed, develop new education outreach program information to fill any gaps that are identified. Any suggestions on tweaking those actions, or is everybody generally comfortable with them? Thumbs up. Thank you, Robert. Jason, okay. Alicia, okay, looks good. All right. Let's move on because there's still more strategies under this one. Strategy D is DES and the planning team, RBC planning teams, and the RBCs conduct regular reviews of the membership to make sure all interest categories are adequately represented. The actions there are just to conduct reviews maybe every 6 months of the membership. And if we need to fill any gaps, both DES and the RBC members conduct outreach to try to fill those gaps and get membership for underrepresented groups. Everybody should be okay with that, pretty straightforward. The next one, DES should organize an annual statewide meeting of RBCs and state agencies. Again, this is a consistent recommendation across many of the RBCs. DES gauges interest from all active RBCs. That's basically already been done by default because that's been a recommendation by many of the RBCs. DES would plan meeting location, set the agenda and invites, also work on what funding might be needed to support that, and then they execute it. So that's pretty straightforward. I'm going to assume there's no comments on that one. As I run through these, if anyone has any suggestions, just stop me, but I'm going to keep moving unless I see a hand raised or hear somebody mention a suggestion. F, DES should continue to designate staff to coordinate and support ongoing RBC activities. Again, that was one of your recommendations. And the action is basically just that, identify staff and funding needs to be able to support ongoing planning. All right, I think there's just one more in this objective, which is RBC members should be encouraged to present their observations and outcomes of the river basin planning process. The actions that we've suggested there are consider putting together an outreach subcommittee. So, 2 or 3 members perhaps that would kind of tackle this and focus on where you can present, whether it be like an SCEC conference or Clemson's biannual water resources conference, or to a local board or to a local COG or any other agency that's interested in Santee River Basin issues. And then the second action would be to basically give those presentations. Any thoughts on this? Feel comfortable with that as actions? Okay, hearing no comments, I'm going to leave it as is. That's all of the, I think, 8 actions, or excuse me, strategies under Objective 2. do you want to try to prioritize any of those 8, either by giving it a high priority, medium priority, low priority, or 1 through 8 priority? What would you like to do? And Michael, as the chair, I'm going to ask you what your thoughts are first.
That's a good question, John. Could we try and push through the rest of the implementation plan and come back to the priority if we have time? Would that be a reasonable approach?
We can, yeah. And just to clarify, other RBCs that have prioritized these using numbers, which is in the minority of the RBCs, they've prioritized them just by objective. We're going to go back then and try to prioritize the objectives, possibly overarching objectives. But in this case, as we're going through the implementation plan, if there's about 45 or 50 strategies, we're not going to try to do 1 through 50 by any means. We're just looking within the objective. So in this case, we would just be doing 1 through 8, or just saying high, medium, or low. Or I think one of the RBCs actually just said, let's just identify the several actions that we identify as priorities. Everything else is not a priority. So it was very simple. They would just say, this is a priority, and leave everything else blank, indicating it wasn't a priority.
Gotcha. Okay.
I
think I like that approach better than trying to number them. Certainly.
Yeah, it was hard to reach consensus on numbering them, and there's just not enough. Honestly, I don't think there's a really need to number them. That's not that helpful. Okay.
I like the idea of just stating priority.
Mm-hmm. Okay. For the strategies under this objective, do you want to identify which ones are a priority now, or would you like to do that at the end, get through the rest of every objective and strategy within each objective? Hickson, go ahead.
I would just say, and maybe I'm coming at this from the wrong angle, I'll be open to that, but I would hope that these are all included because they are priorities, but I may be approaching this from the wrong angle, or maybe I'm not quite understanding what you're saying, but I don't see the point in prioritizing things that we've identified as priorities.
Yeah, that same point has been made in multiple discussions amongst RBCs, like, aren't all these priorities? And I think some of the responses to that were, yeah, they are all our priorities. That's why they're in our plan. But some of them took a more realistic approach and said, we can't assume that we're going to be able to tackle all of these. There may be funding limitations, or there may be a drop in RBC membership, and we can only do some of these. And in that case, they said, well, here's the ones we really want to focus on. And they went ahead and identified some that they felt were the most important, that they really wanted to focus on, but ideally they would do all of them. So that's kind of where the discussion went. And I'm not trying to steer you all in that direction. I'm just kind of giving you background. Jason, you had a comment.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I just want to second what he just said, but it's also the point that we don't know the exact timeline of when implementation occurs. It's sometime post probably the conclusion of this planning cycle and the water SC process, when the state water plan gets a little bit buttoned up, if that's possible. And then we enter some implementation phase, which everybody in all the councils are in agreement is it going to be funded, et cetera. But why funnel ourselves or some future makeup of the RBC into some kind of prioritization scheme when it should be up to the RBC members present in, let's just say, 5 years, when they go to implement, to say, hey, based off of everything that's changed over the last 5 years, what should the priority be? Because priorities change with time. And so that would be another reason not to call out 3 out of 8 of these and just leave all 8 as priorities for the next, whoever's the next RBC makeup to consider what's a priority at that time, rather than them being somehow held to what we decided was a priority in this snapshot of time. So the fact that we all 8 can agree at these making it into the plan shows that we're in agreement they're all important, but and have been prioritized, but to say we think these three are priorities is kind of digging into the weeds and not respectful of the next RBC makeup.
Okay. Hickson, you had a comment too?
Yeah, so I just wanted to share a little bit of this that think this could be relevant. When we set out strategic plans in economic development, I think it's a helpful political setup for what we're trying to achieve, at least legislatively, with this, which is that all of these things, when you set out our plans, we say all of these things are important. But here's like our implementation strategy or our action plan will determine our priorities. So something may be like achievable in 6 months. Well, that's priority number one. Does it create the most effect perhaps as perhaps another action item? No, but the other action item that creates the most effect may take 10 or 15 years. And so you have to maybe there's a good balance here between the realism and the objectivism. Here's just to say, instead of maybe prioritizing them, they are prioritized by the achievability and or the timeline of implementation. As to say, like, well, okay, if this is achievable in 6 months, and our goal is to get results on our implementation plan, maybe this should be a priority for 6 months, and then the next 6 months, this is a priority, and leaving the sort of tiering, if you will, of legislative support to come from the leadership of Water SC or the River Basin Councils who are doing more active lobbying, and with DES who are doing more active lobbying than the RBC, who's really ultimately going to be judged based off of what they actually achieve at the base level. Maybe that's helpful. Maybe that's not.
I think that's helpful. Yeah. Well, we have identified for each action, kind of when the action ideally would begin and how long it may take. So we've got that information in there. So let's keep moving on, and as we finish through all these actions and strategies, we can revisit this and then decide again if we want to attempt to do any priority. But it sounds like we're leaning towards not prioritizing these, but using more so the kind of the schedule as the priority. Okay, let me go down then to the end of objective 2. Start with objective 3, which is improve technical understanding of water resource management issues. And within this one, we've got a handful of strategies as well, up to H, so about 9 different strategies, or 8. The first one, again, based on one of your recommendations, which is incorporate future climate projections into modeling analysis. As part of this, estimate the impact of increasing temperatures on evaporation and evaluate the potential impacts of increased evaporation on Marion and Moultrie. So the actions here would be for a contractor to perform an analysis and present results to the RBC, and then RBC assess the results, incorporate findings into your next plan update. Everyone comfortable with that?
Yeah, John, just might need to tweak the responsible parties there. To be Santee.
Saluda RBC wants to get involved. Thanks.
As you can they can do it if they want to, but
yeah. I was actually going to say I was really in favor of them paying for our contractor personally, but
yeah. Well, given that they are upstream and they have their own reservoirs, they may be doing the same thing. But yeah, the intent was here for the Santee RBC.
John, the only thing I would suggest is that the timing of 1 and 2 be closer together and aligned. There's kind of a big gap between the running of the analysis and then a discussion or assessing of the results. I don't understand why they wouldn't be like one after the other.
Yeah. Maybe it'd be more appropriate to say year 1 or 2, recognizing that it might not happen in the first year.
Or even 1 to 3, but have a continuity of years, whatever you decide.
Yeah. So I said 1 to 3 there, and here we can say, 2 to 3. Does that work?
For me, it does.
Yeah. Okay. All right. The next one is RBC endeavors to learn more about the Pinewood site, including the regulation, consent orders, controls, and monitoring in place. So since that recommendation was put forth, I did circulate a couple websites that hopefully y'all checked out that may have already accomplished this action. If you had a chance to look at those, there's a lot of information on both the Pinewood site website and then DES's own website. But one question is, do you want to actually even keep this as a recommendation? We can keep it as a recommendation. You can continue to, become educated on it. If after looking at the websites and learning more about it, if you want someone to come in and speak and be able to answer questions, that's what this second action is suggesting. So
I appreciate all the information you sent on it, and I looked through it, and I feel comfortable that it's being well managed and that DES has got it. So for me personally, I don't think we need to include it, but I'm open to other ideas.
Okay. And unfortunately, I think that recommendation stemmed from Mike Wooten, and he's not on today. So I'd hate to go behind his back and delete the recommendation altogether. So I'd say let's keep it in there.
Yeah, and I'll second keeping it in there. I mean, it's great that DES is taking over management of the site, but in 10 years, we should probably look at the monitoring to make sure that it's not a problem.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, I'm good with
Yeah,
that
I'd
as
just
well.
say based on my experience, that a lot of times information, well, I think more often than in the past, most of the information you need to really study a site is available online. It's not too hard to FOIA if you need, and it's helpful to poke SCDES every once in a while, whether or not a progress is really being made on a consent order or not. But that's typically my approach to consent orders and consent agreements.
Okay. Hickson and then Robert. Hickson, you want to go first?
Yeah, I just have a quick comment on it, which is to say if people are pretty comfortable that it's being well managed, again, kind of similar to going back to the same thing with industrial, this may potentially be bringing undue fire on them for what is ultimately doing a good job, which just comes from a lack of education. So I would just say, I don't know if there's a way. Like, I agree that the poking is good every once in a while, but and I think that is, I 100% agree, but I think we want to be careful about maybe potentially not trying to throw them under the bus for doing a good job in the public's eyes.
Okay. Robert, what were you going to add?
Yeah, thank you, y'all. And I certainly don't want to speak for DES. I happen to know the trustee for the Pinewood site very well. I think they would welcome an opportunity to engage in dialogue. I'd certainly defer to DES. DES, it's their responsibility. But matter of fact, I was a little late today because I had breakfast with the trustee. So I know he is always looking for an opportunity to tell the Pinewood story. So for whatever that's worth. But I defer to DES.
Okay. Okay, I would suggest we just keep it in for now. Again, this was a recommendation stemming from the discussion that Mike Wooten started. And I see your point, Hickson, about bringing undue direction towards it. But the way the strategy is, it's just RBC wanted to learn more about it and stay abreast of the ongoing remediation and the management of the site. So let's keep it in for now if everyone's okay with that. Sounds good. Okay. The next one, C, future RBC planning efforts should address water quality. Again, that was a consistent recommendation across all the RBCs. We didn't really dive into too much discussion about what specific water quality issues might need to be evaluated in this basin. So that's one of the first actions. If you do want to address water quality and how it may impact quantity, then you need to figure out what specific water quality issues and concerns you have. And based on that, then develop an approach to address those issues and concerns with consideration for existing watershed planning and programs that are already in place. So the idea would be to, augment and supplement any existing and work with any existing programs, not create something new. How do y'all feel about those two actions and the timing of those actions that we have suggested here? And Robert, I'm not sure if your hand's still up from before or if you had another comment.
Sorry, I need to take it down. Apologize.
It's okay. So I saw Alicia give a thumbs up. John gave a thumbs up. Sounds like everyone's comfortable with it is as written. Okay, let's move on to the next page. We had a recommendation about U.S. streamflow gauges and the importance of getting monitoring information. So the strategy here is to support continued efforts to maintain those. The two actions that we've got have been consistent across most of the RBC's implementation plans is develop communication strategies for speaking with the USGS and other entities about funding stream gauges. If you recall, the discussion around those is a lot of them are co-sponsored and they're funded by Dominion or Duke Energy. A lot of the water utilities also fund gauges. And I think that's probably unfortunately going to be kind of the future of gauges, is trying to find support outside of the USGS, at least for beginning to establish those and then ongoing maintenance. The idea here would be you would be advocating for monitoring locations and gauges within your basin, whether you want new ones or whether you want to continue to make sure that the existing ones are maintained, at least at a minimum. So everybody okay with these two actions? Yep, okay. And John Grego, I'm sorry, I didn't see your comment, which I think was from earlier. Yeah, it looks like it was, so does future climate projection include sea level rise? I don't think we've contemplated, at least in any discussions within this RBC or other RBCs, about impacts from sea level rise, but that certainly is, could be a concern or an issue. Are you suggesting that sea level rise be specifically identified and as an action to evaluate?
I don't know. It just occurred to me it hadn't been discussed, and I didn't know how much it might affect saltwater intrusion, which seems to be a critical issue, for surface water and to some extent groundwater. It's just something that popped into my head.
Yeah. No, I think that's a valid concern. Yeah, even going back at the start of my career, about 27 or 8 years ago, when I was doing groundwater modeling on Long Island, New York, we looked at the impact of sea level rise then and what a 1 or 2 or even 3 foot sea level rise would mean to saltwater intrusion, because Long Island is a sole source, as a sole source aquifer. They get all their water supply from groundwater. So it was important then, and that was 20 some years ago. And we did see impacts from sea level rise to the saltwater interface, but I don't know that that's been discussed down here or thought about or looked at, to be honest, along the coast of South Carolina. And I certainly could be wrong.
So John and John Boyer, John Grego. The cool thing is, over the last few decades, we've just got so much more data, partly due to the USGS supported sites, water quality or water quantity sites and water quality sites, and the NOAA supported water quality and water quantity sites. And that's why they're so important. So I definitely don't ever want us, hopefully as a group, conceding that it's going to take private parties to fund these sites. To me, that would be crazy. But as far as the Charleston Harbor, the NOAA site not only has a very long record of monitoring tidal conditions, but also just your daily average levels over a very long period of time with max elevations due to storm surge and all that. But they've actually got a really cool plot of sea level rise plotted over 100 years. And there has been, excuse me, about a half a foot of rise in sea level in the Charleston Harbor over 100 years. And some people would argue that's not very much, but I'd argue since there's not a lot you can do to increase the elevation of metropolitan Charleston or anywhere along the coast, every bit of rise is a problem. And so there actually is quite a bit of work being done to model and plot that. And in the case of the municipalities along the coast, some have done more than others as far as studying and trying to mitigate those things. And as far as Charleston water, specifically around saltwater intrusion up the Cooper, we have been following not only that data, but also the modeled results from the recent Harbor 45 studies by the Army Corps, which kind of looked at storm surge and tidal surge due to deepening of the harbor. And so there's a lot of folks in the coast that are following these things. And so I think it's well understood and modeled, but I just wanted to kind of reassure you, John, that it's not that people aren't talking about it or thinking it's a problem. I just don't know to the extent that we need to address that in this plan or how we would address it in this plan. I'm not so sure we need to, but there are plenty of folks familiar with it, following it to the extent that it affects individual stakeholders.
Good. Yeah. And I kind of misspoke when I was talking about sea level rise impacts to groundwater, saltwater intrusion. That's what I was specifically speaking to. But yeah, I
Gotcha.
didn't mean to suggest that people aren't looking at sea level rise impacts, especially, to Charleston and to infrastructure that's, low lying and that type of thing, and then to the Cooper River as well. So I certainly agree with you. But yeah, that may be something much further down the road for the RBC to consider. Okay, let's move on. The next one is E, work on the groundwater model developed by the USGS should be continued and completed. Again, one of your recommendations. So the actions around that are the USGS to complete their updates and then basically apply it using the current and future conditions that we simulated similarly with surface water, share those findings with the RBC. And from what we heard from Scott and Brooke, that that should continue on over the next year, maybe 2 years, and you should start to see some results as they finish calibrating and applying the models. We have an action that you could potentially recommend additional scenarios for modeling based on the preliminary results. And then the idea would be for you to incorporate those findings into your next plan update, whether it be 5 years from now or whatever. Everyone comfortable with those actions? Okay, moving on. F, support for DES and USGS monitoring of groundwater levels. So very similar to the stream flow gauges one. DES seeks funding and drills new monitoring wells in groundwater areas of concern as needed. And DES analyzes collected water level data. Everyone okay with that? Thumbs up. Great. Okay. 2 more in this category. G is study the impacts of land use changes on the supply of and demand for water resources. This has also been a rather typical recommendation, which turns into a strategy in a lot of the other RBCs. The actions that we've proposed are similar to what some of the RBCs have done, and actually what the broad RBC has already done as part of their initial steps in implementation. They had Research Triangle Institute come in and talk about the work that they did in the Catawba Water which is focused on rainfall runoff modeling using their waterfall model and using it as a tool to prioritize land conservation. So actually, I think the broad RBC found that presentation very informative. That's what we've recommended here as the first action. And then the second action would be based on what you learned, consider performing similar type of land conservation modeling to identify how land use changes may impact water resources. Any thoughts or suggestions on that? Hickson, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I would just say quickly here that as a county which doesn't currently have land use ordinance and or also called zoning ordinances, this would be extremely useful for us in county government to be able to predict some of that. So this could actually help to inform some pretty insightful local decisions.
Okay, good feedback. Any other thoughts, or is everyone comfortable with these actions? All right. Moving on to H, DES performs studies and analysis in support of a recycled water statute in South Carolina. That strategy stems from the recommendation that we just tweaked the language for a little bit, but I think the strategy still is appropriate. The actions would be DES develops a scope of study based on input from Water Reuse SC and the RBCs and relying on examples from other states. And then they report the findings to the RBCs. Alan, are you comfortable with those actions, or any other RBC members have any suggestions? We may have lost Alan. I see Gwen did join. So Gwen or Tony, or no, you're Alan, you're still here. There you are.
Yeah, I'm back. I had to step out of my office for a second, John. I apologize for that.
That's all right. The actions that we've identified that I'm highlighting on the screen here around supporting the recommendation about recycled water statute. Are you comfortable with those actions, or do you have any other suggestions?
That looks good to me, John.
Okay. Okay, I think that's then all of the strategies and actions for the third objective. Let's move on to the fourth one, and we're doing okay on time. This one is protect water resources, enhance access to new sources, and build resilience. A little bit of a catch-all objective. We had a number of recommendations, though, that fall within that. First one, water users should continue to identify partnerships and alternative sources, including interconnections, to build resilience and ensure adequate quantity of water. This one's, again, kind of more of a suggestion for the water users, primarily, municipal water users. The actions around that are basically just to share findings from this River Basin plan on the modeling analysis. We did have identified shortages in this basin. And there could be, some stress in the basin during drought periods for the two regional water systems, which pull from Marion and Moultrie. And those regional water systems wholesale water to a number of other systems. So, Michael, we've talked about this a little bit. You have contingency plans in place to potentially get you have contingency plans in place, I guess is what I should say. Doesn't mean, though, that we should continue to evaluate additional sources and suggest, more interconnections to be able to get through exceptionally dry times that might be drier than what we even modeled. The second strategy or action here was the RBC recommends water management strategies in the River Basin plan to be implemented to reduce those potential shortages. That's kind of a repeat of our whole first set of actions under water management strategies. Everyone okay with these? All right, the next one. State and local governments should continue to develop, review, update, adopt, and enforce laws, regulations, policies, and ordinances that improve the management of stormwater runoff, encourage infiltration, minimize stream bank erosion, reduce sedimentation, and protect water resources. You recall the genesis of this recommendation was from some similar recommendations made by the Saluda, Lower Savannah, Salkehatchie. We kind of simplified and condensed it. The action here, I think, would mainly be to just work with local governments and the COGS perhaps to incorporate strategies into land use planning, zoning, and permitting processes that are consistent with some of the messages we're trying to get across through this River Basin plan. Somewhat of a little bit of a vague action, but unless anyone has any specific recommendations there, we'll keep it as that. I'm seeing some thumbs up, so I think we'll go with that.
John, sorry.
Yep. Go
This
ahead.
is Gwen.
Hey, Gwen.
Hi. There was a low impact development manual that was written. I don't know if you want more specific, but that was written, I think, to help MS4s or projects, like meet state requirements for quantity and quality improvements. I don't know if there's like some opportunity to reference that here. I think a lot of partnership went into developing that. But also too, with this responsible party, it says RBC will do outreach. Are we really going to do outreach, or should we, could that be an existing organization like Clemson Extension's Water Resource Program, who kind of already have partnerships with the MS4s that they could help, assist with some of that.
Yeah, I think not only for this one, but any strategy where you have to do outreach. We recognize that the RBC, and especially you all, since you're about half the size of the other RBCs, have very limited ability to do outreach. I still think it's important to do outreach where you can, but the responsible parties for all these different actions kind of recognizes that you're going to need a lot of support from DES and others. Gwen, the low impact development guide or manual that you mentioned, who wrote that or who prepared that?
It was the Center for Watershed Protection, and it was funded by DNR. And then it had a lot of different like technical advisors on it, including like engineering firms and some of the county MS4s. And I can find it. The electronic copy of it used to be housed through like the University of South Carolina. I can find it and send it to you in the chat if you want. But DES was involved with the time and review of it as well.
Okay. It might be worth including a link to that in Chapter 9 where we have this actual recommendation, just as an example of a manual that's already in place that can help local governments. I'm sure many of them are already aware of it, but it doesn't hurt to include it in our plan. So if you could send me that link, I'll maybe add that to Chapter 9 where this recommendation occurs.
John, I only had a question regarding the language. Under responsible parties for this provision, it says local governments and COGS to enact amendments. Are you suggesting amendments to their MS4 stormwater plans or amendments to this RBC plan? I'm not sure what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's probably not a good phrase here. This is more, enact new ordinances, policies, whatever it might be.
It seems a little bit of a duplicate. If you read the strategy, it goes into continue to develop, review, update, adopt, enforce laws, regulations, policies, and ordinances, which we, as Gwen pointed out, is talking probably about MS4s. So it just seems like this whole second sentence under this box is redundant and maybe even alluding to things not applicable.
So you're suggesting just striking this part of it?
Unless somebody can add clarity to what the responsible party, the RBC in this case, is supposed to be amending.
Yeah, I think the only reason we had it there is that it just recognizes that, the RBC can advocate for this type of thing and suggest it be done, but for it to be implemented, for new ordinances or regulations or policies to be implemented, that falls on the local governments and the COGS. But I don't know that we need to state that. That's obvious. So we may just want to delete it and focus the responsible parties on the part that is tied to the actual action. I think that's what you're suggesting here, right?
Right.
Yep. I agree with that. Okay. I'm going to keep moving. Again, anybody interrupt me if I'm going too fast. C, a cost share program should be developed to drill deeper wells into aquifer units with less development pressure and operate them. This was a recommendation, I think, that first came out of the PDRBC, and we discussed it in our council, and y'all agreed to include it. The actions here are the coastal RBCs collaboratively work to encourage the legislature to approve some type of cost share program that promotes the installation of deeper wells or development in areas where there's development pressure on the shallower aquifers. And then with support from the legislature, DES develop and administer the cost of the program. Hickson, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just confused. I'm confused a little bit, and I'll admit that I'm behind, but I'm confused a little bit. Are we promoting these deeper wells for observing or for encouraging people to drill deeper wells? I'm a little confused.
Yeah, no, this is for deeper production wells, not monitoring wells. So we're encouraging to lessen demand on some of the shallower wells where there have been drawdowns and cones of depression and potential issues that could occur into the future, given future pumping, trying to get it to deeper aquifers.
Okay, got it. Yeah, totally agree, 100%.
Okay. Any other comments on this one? Nope. Okay, let's move on. All right, that's it for objective 4. We only had 3 strategies there with a number of actions for protecting water resources, new sources, build resilience. The last one is objective 5, improve drought management. These strategies come from the recommendations that y'all developed and are documented in chapter 8 of the plan. First one is water utilities should review their drought management plans and update them. Every 5 years or 10 years, more frequently if conditions change. So the actions there are the public suppliers on the RBC. So this is Jason and Mount Pleasant folks and Alicia. You guys would be the example and update your plans and send them to the state climatology office. Second action would be public suppliers on the RBC consider ways to incorporate the RBC's drought management recommendations into their plans. Remember, we had a few different recommendations about implementing, encouraging drought surcharges and things like that. And the third one would be public suppliers share updates to the drought management plans with the state climate office. Water suppliers on the council, you good with those actions? Alicia is. Jason is. Now, Pleasant folks, I know you already updated your plan within the last several years, and it's one that I think Hope uses as an excellent example of plans in the state. So I think you've already accomplished these. All right, the last one, DES and DNR lobby for state funding to support the review and update of drought management plans by water utilities, especially smaller utilities with less financial technical resources. This one stemmed out of discussion in the lower Savannah, Salkehatchie, where some of the utilities made the point that they often lack the technical resources and they potentially could use some help updating their plans and making sure that they were very useful and relevant. So the actions here for RBC to work with DNS and DNR and determine the level of funding that might be needed to help these utilities update their plans every so often, and then communicate that funding need to the legislature. Everyone comfortable with that? Good. And Hickson mentioned we could really use that support in our Tier 4 county. So good point. All right. Okay, well, that is a run through of all the actions. We've made a few tweaks. Let's revisit this discussion on prioritizing. First, prioritizing any of these actions. Do we want to continue just to leave them unprioritized and assume that because they're in our plan, they're all a priority and they'll be tackled based on what we've identified as the schedule for tackling them? Or would anyone want to suggest that we try to identify a subset that are higher priority? Yeah, Sarah, go ahead.
Are there any of these that are foundational to other things as a process? Like, I understand the idea that it's up to future folks as well as us the next 3 to 5 years or whatever, because priorities do change. But are there any that are foundational in process to other ones moving forward? Does that make sense?
Mhm. I think that's kind of subjective. My response, and I'm not on the RBC, I'm just the facilitator, is that the objective one strategies, those are all fundamental strategies. The water planning framework suggests that the river basin councils should be incorporating a water conservation ethic and advocating for water conservation and efficient use of water. And just because of that, I see this objective one and the strategies and actions we have here as the most fundamental ones that you should do, kind of the low-hanging fruit, even before you try to tackle any of the other ones that we've just run through. But that's just my opinion. Other RBC members, do you have thoughts? Hickson, your hand is raised.
Yeah, I'm almost imagining like a Gantt chart of some kind, with the timelines of different activities sort of laid out. It can be very general, but I think that helps to address maybe, and forgive me, I didn't know your name, but who just spoke in terms of what's foundational to other things, being able to stack those things which do rely on earlier actions together. And then setting out a priority only for the items that overlap in time. So if like we've got two things that we've got to do year one, then that's more, we're going to have to prioritize one of those two things. And that helps for us. It's more of a heads tails question than having to say, well, is this more important than something 5 years from now? Take it down to just a choice between two things. I think just setting those priorities, if we are going to prioritize just based on our time, because we will have to prioritize our time and say, if we've got 1 year to do these 3 action items, we'll need to prioritize those among those 3, but perhaps avoid prioritizing year 1 over year 4, year 5 actions.
Okay.
But maybe some kind of Gantt chart or organization of the activities could be helpful.
Sure. I think that'd be pretty easy to put together if the rest of the RBC saw value in that. We could do kind of a simple Gantt chart just to get every action and strategy on the same page. So you see kind of the timeline.
I think that would be very helpful, John.
Okay. Sarah, thinking a little bit more about your question too, there's some other fundamental actions and strategies I think that feed into all the other ones, like these strategies and actions under Objective 2, which is focused on education and outreach. It makes sense just to start with that. Again, that builds your foundation and it gets more people understanding and interested in water conservation, and I would say that needs to be done, first before you try to tackle a lot of this other stuff. But okay, any other thoughts about priorities? Do you want to not attempt to prioritize these now, or maybe wait and see what this Gantt chart that Hickson suggested looks like? And you have limited time because of our schedule to make additional adjustments. But we could talk about potentially prioritizing things at our in-person RBC meeting in 2 weeks. And maybe that's the best approach, is let you look at the whole River Basin plan, which we're going to try to get out right before the meeting. You can look at, again, this revised implementation table in the context of the other information that we're going to have in Chapter 10 related to funding options, and we'll include some type of schedule or Gantt chart. Based on that, let's just revisit this prioritization discussion then and see at that time if we want to do any prioritization of certain actions. Is everyone comfortable with that?
Yeah, I think that makes sense, John.
Yeah, okay. I'm assuming that same thought applies then to prioritizing objectives. And again, the other RBCs struggled with trying to prioritize objectives, given that each objective had multiple actions and strategies. So most of them didn't do it, but some of them did, and some of them gave it like a high or medium or low. Do you want to wait on this as well?
I would actually say, John, when it comes to objectives, it's so foundational to everything else. I think this needs to be addressed.
You think we should try to prioritize objectives?
Absolutely. So that way we're not, when we apply that lens to our prioritization of activities, we can say this is objectively a higher priority activity because it meets our top objective. I think we have to have why we're doing it at the heart of choosing what we do.
Okay. Yep. What do others think? Do y'all agree with Hickson or?
This is John, Greg. Yeah, I do think that, the objectives are, there's 5 of them because they're like 5 different dimensions, if you will. So that does make them hard to prioritize. And one feels that something always like, communication and coordination will always get short shrift. So that'd be my only caveat on prioritizing them, other than something like, if you felt like you had to do high, medium, low, you could, I guess.
Lisa or Michael, what do y'all think?
Can I just ask, so I'm super excited because, I'm new to this industry. I don't know that I've ever seen a Gantt chart. So I'm really looking forward to that. But could the Gantt chart in part take the place of a list, so to speak, so that you can see the spirit of what we thought should go first and overlap, but then leave it to future RBCs to alter course? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's one of the uses of the chart that Hickson is suggesting.
I would just say to John, just to kind of flesh out what I'm saying a little bit better for John's very insightful comment. I think the objectives are on here because they're important, and we're acknowledging that by having them on here. I do think it's not. I do think it's really important to prioritize all of them on here, even at the risk of saying, "Oh, well, this might be a lower priority," but with the acknowledgement that these are obviously all important because they're all on here. If they weren't important and or follow, they wouldn't be an objective of ours. But I think we're not doing our future RBCs any favors by saying, hey, all 5 of these are equally important to tackle at the same time. I think you have to outline and you have to outline for them to some extent so they can pick up the mission and keep it going. And there's some acknowledgement too that some of these things might change. Like the RBC may lose all authority to impact one area as we get to year 4 or 5. And then you could say, okay, well, we'll drop that down to a low priority, and each RBC is going to reassess their objectives collectively, I would assume, as they kind of go along. I don't think there's anybody who's going to stand here and object to them doing that, assuming that we won't be in that room when it happens anyway. But I think we're only making our jobs hard on ourselves if we don't. I think we have to lay out our objectives in a prioritized status, and I think you take the items that are the biggest risk first. Yeah, I think water use efficiency is a good one. That may and it sort of speaks to other things, but we got to say, okay, what are we trying to avoid here? What's the point of us, not to take your job here, John Boyer? You're obviously doing a great job facilitating, but just to say we've got to identify why are we here and why do we care?
Yep. Good points.
John, just very briefly, looking at this list, there are items on it that are much more within our scope of influence as a council than some of the other ones. I guess more immediate action items we could take. So, communicating, coordinating, and promoting findings and recommendations from the plan, I feel like that's something we as a council can take on in good conscience and feel like we could do a good job. Helping folks improve technical understanding of water resource management issues. I think we could do that as well. The other stuff, we can seek to improve those things, but they may be a little bit less in our control, if that makes sense. And so maybe we can approach it that way and prioritize what we know to be within our realm of influence, unless the goal here is to communicate the importance at a more global scale. And I guess maybe that's a distinction we need to make.
Yeah.
I think that's really important that you said, like, the top priorities should be the things that we can impact. If it's something that we're relying on partners to use, we can't. I think we outlined that in our prioritization justification. We say this is something we can impact and have a direct role in, so that should be our top priority. Whereas if we're relying on other parties, it's certainly a priority to encourage them to do that, but we ultimately can't be judged. I don't think we judge ourselves based on something we're relying somebody else to do for us.
Okay.
Well, I hate to put something on the bottom of the prioritization list because we're not in as much control over it. Because, like, for instance, objective 3 with understanding the water resource management issues, that is just critical, but we don't have a lot of control in it. But we don't want to make it not a prioritization because we don't have control over it. We need that in order to be able to do our job.
And I guess, Alicia, maybe what I'm thinking is if we clarify that we recognize it's important, but it's outside of our control, then maybe that helps others understand we need help getting it addressed. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
that makes sense. So, John, what's the point of the table here? Like, what are we trying to say?
Well, the reason we're doing this exercise because the planning framework recommended that RBCs try to prioritize their objectives within the implementation plan and those actions and strategies within them. So, following the guidelines of the planning framework, we're trying to see if we can do some prioritization. But all the comments that y'all have made so far are very good. There's a lot of different ways to look at this. And I think it's just up to the RBC to decide how you want to look at this. And based on that, if you want to attempt some type of prioritization. The PDRBC, which I was not as much involved with, I think actually just did a very democratic type process and asked each RBC member to rank objectives. I know they did this with water management strategies, but I think they did this with their implementation plan and how they prioritize things. So, I mean, I could simply send out a poll or a survey and ask each RBC member to rank these 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 based on what they see as a priority. We compile all the ranks, and then how it rolls out is how it rolls out. That'd be the most democratic way to do it. I'm not suggesting we do that, but I just wanted to offer it as one way to do it.
I think there's a sorority rush model that we can use that does a lot of that ranking by preferences and then using a computer model to build your objective number 1, objective number 2.
I'm not familiar with the sorority model, but well, we've got just a little bit more time. What would you all like to do? Would you like to? I've heard, at least from Michael, that I think you're suggesting, this one is high because it's more in RBC's control. And it's also, communication and outreach, promoting the findings is what you have to do to meet objective 1, right? I mean, objective 1, our actions are to reach out to the water utilities and say, hey, and reach out to ag folks and others and say, hey, here's what you should be doing to help use water more efficiently. That kind of falls with
these objectives aren't mutually exclusive from each other, which does make this difficult.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, and that was to John's point. I mean, they're so overlapping. And as I kind of let everybody flesh out potential ways to prioritize or share how they would prioritize, I'm just sitting here trying to figure out what order I would put them at myself in a vacuum, and I'm struggling to do so. So it's not easy, even if you're only asking yourself.
Right.
Well, I would say too, I like this idea, John, what you're doing right here, which is instead of putting them all in their each own individual, maybe we just say high, medium, low, or high, very high, very, very high. I don't know. I wasn't an English student, but in a way, we don't have to have 5 tiers because there's 5 objectives. We can have 2 highs, 2 mediums, 1 low, and go with that instead of trying to put 5 objectives in 5 different qualifying tiers.
Yeah. We could also do a blended approach where we really truly get everybody's feedback and have them rank them, but then we don't rank them number wise based on the results of the poll, but we say, okay, the top 2 are called high, the next 2 or maybe all the rest are like medium or something.
That would be one possibility. I have a hard time believing anybody's going to think any of these are low, or they wouldn't have been agreed upon by the RBC.
Yeah, that's been a similar refrain in a lot of the RBC discussions. Is there was hesitancy to identify anything as low because why is it even here if it's a low priority?
I think you look at these, like Michael said, we're going to be judged based off of how we execute the things that we're responsible for executing. So I feel like those should be the things that are prioritized highly, which is why I agree with him that I think objective 2, it's not mutually exclusive to the rest of them. And it's a good example of like, this should be a high priority because it's something we solely are responsible for doing. So it would be a bit bizarre to put the things that we're responsible for doing as perhaps a very low or a low priority, because that's what we've been tasked with doing. So I think it's helpful to identify, like you said, what are we actually, and it'll help us if we're to prioritize actions, because we could say, okay, we're actually supposed to execute on this. It's not we're waiting on something, so it doesn't have to be the highest, but we've got to outline, I think, to some extent, what we're responsible for. Otherwise, we're only going to make the job harder on ourselves if we don't have some type of hierarchy.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, Michael, what are you thinking would be most useful? I've heard a number of different suggestions on how to do this. We've got limited time in today's meeting.
Yeah, John, I think if we can maybe, trying to think of a nuanced way to do this, if we can communicate that, say objective 2 is the priority for the RBC, but that we think these other things are maybe equally as important, we just need help getting there. I don't know if I'm making sense with that.
No, I think I see what you're saying. You are kind of also arguing that 3 was a priority for the RBC too, or was I misrepresenting that?
I think that's also within our realm of influence. In the spheres that we each work in, we have the ability to be sharing what we've learned from all of this over the last year and making sure people are aware of the issues at hand. And then, the rest of the objectives, I think, are all equally important to the state. We just need help from, other utilities and from the legislature and from DES and other entities to get there.
Okay. Okay, well, that's certainly an easy approach. I think what we can do is, as we write chapter 10, and on the first page of chapter 10, we introduce these objectives. Following that is this table that we just went through of all the implementation plan actions and strategies. But as we introduce this on the first page, I think we can kind of reflect what you just summarized there, Michael, is that we've identified 2 and 3 as the RBC priorities because that's where you have the most influence. And that's where you're going to start. From that, some of these other objectives kind of build. So let's see if we can craft some language around that. For now, we'll just identify these two as priorities. Let you all react to chapter 10 when we send it out for review next week. And if we want to tweak that and dive a little more into the details of prioritization, we can. Does that work for everyone? Thumbs up. Okay. That will be the plan. All right. Let's just do a quick look ahead. Got a few more minutes left. Our next meeting is October 14th, so just in a couple weeks. Same location as we had the last two meetings, correct, Michael? Panopolis?
That's correct. Yep.
Yep. And I think I've already circulated the agenda for that. What we're going to be doing during that meeting is taking any final or discussing any final suggested edits to the draft River Basin plan. So before we have that meeting, we obviously need to get that to you so you can review the whole thing together. You've been seeing individual chapters, and we've been receiving comments from, I'd say, 5 or 6 RBC members, good comments. We're going to circulate the comment log, so it makes it a lot easier for you to see how we addressed your comments or see how we addressed other RBC members' comments. We'll circulate that log when we circulate the full draft plan, and that'll be sometime near the end of next week. The 3 chapters that I just sent out yesterday, 5, 6, and 7. Chapter 5 is pretty lengthy. It's not an easy read because it's very technical and it covers both surface water and groundwater. Chapter 6, you've generally already seen a lot of that information because it was circulated in the Water Management Strategies memorandum that y'all read before we started discussing strategies. Chapter 7 is very short because it just identifies the strategies you all selected that were appropriate for your basin. But it will take you some time to get through 5, and I encourage you to read it. I think I gave you until next Friday to provide comments, but I'm also trying to get you a full plan by next Friday as well, ahead of our Tuesday meeting the following week. So what I'm trying to suggest is that get us your comments as soon as you can on 5, 6, and 7, so that when we circulate the draft plan, when we prepare the final draft plan, we're not, circling back and trying to address last minute comments, but not much more we can do to get around it because we're kind of pressed for time. Regardless, you're going to see the full plan before the 14th. You're also going to see the executive summary. And if you haven't had much opportunity to review the individual chapters, I really encourage you to read the executive summary. It's going to be 20 to 25 pages or so. That will be circulated hopefully by the end of next week as well. We need to release the draft plan by October 17th, which will be 3 days after the RBC meeting where we discuss any final tweaks and we do the test of consensus on the plan. So we're voting on the plan using the 1 to 5 scale. We'll release the plan, and then we'll have our November 18th public meeting, and that'll start a 30-day comment period, which will end in late December. We'll address the draft plan comments if we receive any and release the final plan. So that's what we have to accomplish by the end of the year to be able to have a final plan by the end of the year. One of the other things we're going to talk about at the meeting in 2 weeks is the public meeting presentation, and Lauren, who's on right now, has been working on draft slides, so we'll review those during the meeting on Tuesday the 14th. Any questions about what y'all's responsibilities are over the next couple weeks and what needs to get done and where we're going? Catherine Min had a comment or question. John, what time will the public meeting be? We haven't scheduled it yet, but yeah, Catherine or Brooke answered 6 p.m. All the public meetings have been usually 6 to 7:30 or 6 to 8. Michael, we talked last time about 2 potential venues. One, the Santee Cooper headquarters auditorium. Is that what we're looking like or is that what we're still aiming for?
Yeah, John, that's what we'll have available that evening. We tossed around the Somerset facility, but I think there was some discomfort from our security folks about having an unconfirmed list of people coming into that facility. We're a little better set up to handle visitors here at the main office.
Good. Okay. So that'll be good. It'll be their headquarters in Monk's Corner, 6 o'clock, 8 o'clock. We can talk in 2 weeks about whether you want to do anything like the Saluda RBC did to try to encourage attendance, like, a raffle or something else. I think I mentioned the Lower Savannah Salkehatchie had watermelon and a water taste testing. Not really a competition, but just water taste testing from the Savannah River and 3 or 4 different aquifers. So that was kind of fun, but we can figure that out when we meet in 2 weeks. Scott, you had a comment or a question.
Hey, John, I like the taste testing idea. Vote 1 for that. We could even bring like raw water, just so, raw water, finished water, people could look at it. Anyway, I think that's great when people can see things.
Yeah, if you want to do that.
I'm going to veto it based on unfair grounds of surface water compared to aquifer taste testing.
Hey,
it's not fair.
We'll be clear, Jason. There's no points. There's not a winner. It's just general education,
Exactly.
Oh.
Yeah. All right. We'll talk about that a little more, but that was I think the attendees found that useful, and they were really surprised at how much difference in taste there was from Savannah River versus Crouch Branch versus Florida Aquifer.
Well, John, you know where I'm going, and it wouldn't be a taste test, but if I love the clear glass bottle concept, and I'll bring some effluent. I think it's important to look at effluent compared to raw source water, because many people, they're going to be surprised how clear and clean wastewater treatment plant effluent is compared to raw surface water. It's just a great opportunity. I think people love a touch area, show and tell. So I'm a thumbs up, and could certainly help put that together if the group wants to do it, but we can talk about it later.
That sounds good.
Hey, John.
Yeah, Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick comment for Michael. If you don't mind sending me, just to make sure I have the address right, and any other details regarding parking or what room we're meeting in for the public meeting, just so we can get all that documented on the website when the time comes. That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, I can do that, Scott. Should be hopefully a little bit easier than the last couple of times we met here, because it'll be after hours. So I don't think there will be as much of a restriction on parking, and we'll get some signage made up to make it easy once people get on site too.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure thing.
I don't think Gwen is on anymore, but I do want to give Gwen some props. If y'all are on LinkedIn, she had a video that I just saw in my feed yesterday where she was out and about Mount Pleasant asking folks if they knew what an aquifer was. And the responses were kind of telling. There was not a lot of folks that actually knew what an aquifer was. So it's good that she's out doing education and outreach.
I'll pass it on, John. She'll appreciate that.
Yep.
So an aquifer is not the color of my blouse?
No, it's not.
I think that was one response.
That was one response, yeah. And Jason, surprisingly, your picture popped up right after Gwen's in my LinkedIn feed. You were on a boat with
Baker Stevens, my
Baker.
assistant.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So
yeah, the old and the new, the cycle of life.
Right. And it was like source water protection or something, since it was source water protection week or day or anyway. Okay, well, we're right at top of the hour. That's all I had to cover. Thank you all for getting through the implementation plan really quick. Anyone have any other final comments or questions before we adjourn?
Thank you, John.
Nope. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Meeting. Appreciate it, John.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks for driving the group, John. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.